glad to see like a lot of quite number joining us today. So just to kick things off without taking too much of time, I'm going to quickly give an intro to what we do and who we have today with us. So I'm not sure how many people joined our last Developer Ventures talk, but we actually had Pratim joining us and talking about developer advocacy, and she spoke about the different roles and the possibilities of even not being technical on how you can contribute and be a developer advocate and learn on the process as well. So this time we actually have another developer advocate, but he's actually someone who recently joined Vercel and has been doing wonders and building up a name for him in the web community as well as the Web3 community, as well as in the developer space, developer advocacy space as well. So today, just to give you a recap on what Developer Ventures is, so it's a series of meetup that's actually initiated by the educational activities of the Sri Lanka Computer Society chapter. IEEE Sri Lanka Community Society chapter. So it kind of helps us developers to like build products and advance our skills, careers, and network, and also build a name in the developer community in general. So today we have Stephen Tay. He is actually the developer advocate at Vercel. So Stephen, why don't you just go ahead, give an intro to what Vercel and give an intro to what Next.js is. And a bit of housekeeping. If you guys have any questions, please do put them on chat and we'll take them later on.
Sounds good. Is it okay if I share my screen?
Sure, go ahead.
Cool. Let's do this desktop. Okay, so hey everyone, my name is Steven. As Mithushan mentioned, I am currently a developer advocate at Resell. So I joined Resell about 10 months ago now. I had actually a data science background in college. So I was just telling Nipun earlier that I actually did one of my semesters in Hyderabad, India. And it's not too far away from Sri Lanka. So it's a place I've always wanted to visit, but never got a chance to. So hopefully sometime in the future, I'll get to do that. But yeah, so I joined Resell 10 months ago. The story of that was I was basically building my own startup before that. And I got to know the team at Resell, and I've always been a fan of their product. I got to know the CEO, and eventually he was able to convince me to, instead of doing my startup, join Resell as a developer advocate, given my interest in, posting knowledge about web development on Twitter, and also writing content, and also building really cool starter kits. So that's how I got to join Resell. And I think to elaborate a bit more on the developer advocate role, I would consider it as a fusion between product, customer success, engineering, and also content creation. So essentially, you're the face of the company, whether it's on social media, whether it's on GitHub. You're basically the one who is being the forefront of, you basically represent the company, and you're supposed to be the one who knows the product inside and out. But at the same time, you also get to know all the pain points that your customers or users face. And you're going to be the one who is conveying that to the product team and informing future product decisions. So this is sort of like it's an intersection of all the things that I'm very interested in. So that's why I decided to join as a developer advocate. And yeah, it's a bit of a long-winded intro, but there it is. Cool. Should I just dive right into the talk, or Mithushan, what do you think? Okay, I can't hear Mithushan, so
sure, you can actually get going on with the talk.
Okay. So in today's talk, I'm just going to talk a little bit about Next.js, which is the framework. It's a React framework that is created by Vercel, and it's basically a way for you to build hyper-performant web applications, whether it's from a user experience perspective or from a content delivery perspective globally. So this is just, okay. So today's agenda, we're going to be starting from the beginning of React. So what React did was it empowered developers to build applications rather easily. And it all started with client-side rendering. And then we eventually developed technologies like server-side rendering, static-side generation, incremental static regeneration, OnDemand ISR, which is incremental static regeneration. I made a little typo there. Edge functions. And then lastly, I'm going to talk a bit about the platform starter kit. So if some of these terms might be a little confusing, don't worry about it. I'm going to explain them thoroughly throughout this presentation. So yeah, let's just get started. Client-side rendering. The way React empowered developers to build applications is the framework allowed you to create functional components that represents different parts of your site. So in this case, in this example that I've given here, it's a site component. It basically shows you how it's fetching data on the client side using a hook. In this case, it's called useSiteData. It basically allows you to fetch the content when the user requests the page and display the content using a map, blah, blah, blah. So this works for, for a website. However, it introduced loaders, skeleton loaders. So as you can see as you can see in this example here, when you refresh the page, there will be skeleton loaders because that's when the hook is fetching data and it's happening on the client side, which is not very ideal for user experience. And also it doesn't really allow Google or the Google bot to index your content properly because you're loading JavaScript after the page is being loaded by the user. And that's bad for SEO, which means that your sites won't rank as high as other sites, which is not ideal. And that's when Nextjs came in. And Nextjs basically allowed, we created this function. We created this ability to do server-side rendering. And what that means is it allows you to fetch data. Instead of fetching data on the client side, you'll be fetching data on the server side. And so when a user requests the page, the server will be serving the page with all the data already loaded on the page itself. So as you can see here, we have a GetStaticProps function that uses the same hook that I mentioned earlier, get all posts. It gets all the posts and then it feeds it to the client as a prop called data. And then within the client, you'll be able to render the data, and it's all server rendered, which means that the content is already generated when the user requests it. And it's also better for SEO because Googlebot can actually see each of those posts that are being rendered. However, the downside for this is it costs what the term for it is called time to first byte. And what that means is that when you first request a page, you'll have to wait for, there'll be like the browser will be loading for a little bit because it's requesting the data on demand. So as you can see here, when you click on the link, it takes a while because the browser is fetching the data. And for this case, the data is not cached because each request will be triggering that function that I mentioned earlier, get all posts, to fetch the latest version of the data. Pros of this approach is obviously you get the most recent data every single time. However, it's not a very good user experience because the user will have to sit there and wait for this gray screen until the page actually loads, which is not ideal. So this is why the Nextjs team created another function called GetStaticProps. And that basically allows you to cache and serve static content from the server side. So it's almost the same as the GetStaticProps function. However, in this case, each of the content that is being requested is cached, which means it's really, really fast. So you can see here, when I refresh the page, okay, it's not really showing it, but it's the reason for that is because it's really fast, where when you refresh the page, the content is already cached, so everything is served statically. The downside for this approach, though, is it doesn't really allow you to fetch the latest version of the data because the data itself is cached, which means that every time you refresh the page or a new user requests the page, they get served stale data. And that's not ideal for e-commerce products, for example, where products need to be updated in real time, the users need to get the most latest version of the data, because what if like some of the products might be sold out, so they need to be able to get the data on demand. So what the Next.js team did to counter this downside or this limitation is we created incremental static regeneration. And this is a way for users to, for websites to still serve static data, but set a revalidate time frame during which the data will be like the same cache data will be served, but then any subsequent requests out of that time frame will get served the fresh version of the data. So in this case, for example, if you compare the code to the one before, we have a revalidate property, and that is set to 10 seconds, which means that all the requests within a 10-second time frame will be served the cache version of the data, but then the subsequent request outside of that time frame, they will be served the latest version of the data, and that data will be server generated, basically. With this approach, it's almost ideal, right? You get served static data, and then it's always up to date. However, it's not. There are still some downsides to it. So first, it creates a large server load. So for example, a data is not very frequently updated, but then you still set a 10-second revalidate time frame, which means that all requests outside of the 10-second time frame will require a serverless function invocation. It basically means that you need to run this get all posts function again, even though the data is not updated. So it doesn't really make sense for data that have varying timeframes of when they're updated. And that so to counter that, we recently released this thing called OnDemand ISR. It basically exposes a function called revalidate. In this case, we are calling it unstable revalidate because it's still in beta. But basically, it allows you to on demand revalidate that GetStaticProps function instead of waiting for that 10-second time frame that I mentioned earlier. So in this case, you don't even need to set a 10-second time frame. You just need to say if the data is out of date. So if the data is being updated in the backend, you trigger this unstable revalidate function, and that allows you to update the data, regenerate the page on the server side, send it to the cache, and that makes sure that every user that requests your page will be served the latest version of the data, no matter if they are getting it within that 10-second time frame or not. So this is pretty much the most ideal way to build content-heavy applications. It has good SEO, it gives a great user experience, and it allows you to not have to overwhelm your servers with a lot of like revalidate functions being triggered unnecessarily. So I'm gonna show you a really quick example. This is basically it's actually related to the platform starter kit that we'll be talking about later. But basically, to show what the difference between ISR, like vanilla ISR versus on-demand ISR, here's a good example that shows you that. So as you can see here, on the left-hand side, we are using on-demand ISR, which means that we don't need to have a very small revalidate interval. It can be 3600 seconds, which is like, I don't know, 10 minutes or something. Okay, I can't do math, but basically I'm just gonna replay the video again. So here, as you can see, when you hit publish, it automatically revalidates the page, which means that you're being served the latest version of the data. Whereas if you're using just regular ISR, you can publish, you see, when we publish a new change, kitchen sink example test, the data is still stale, and you got to refresh it a bunch of times, like 2-3 times, for you to be able to get that latest version of the data, which makes on-demand ISR so much more powerful because all you need to do is hit publish and the data is always fresh. So going back to my slides here. Okay. Oops, jumping way ahead. So edge functions. So this is another technology that I want to like talk a little bit about. So edge functions is essentially a way for you to run code on the edge. Okay, let me rewind a little bit. So edge functions is a way for you to intercept the user's request and perform some JavaScript logic on the edge, and then serve the user content that is personalized and also at a very, very fast response time. So a good real world example to put this into perspective is, for example, if you want to do A/B testing. I can show you a quick example right now. I was actually just looking at this. So for example, here, if you wanted to do some A/B testing on the banner, and if you refresh the page, if you're doing A/B testing on the client side, it usually causes some form of layout shift. So in this case, if I refresh the page, as you can see here, they are fetching some data on the client side, and then they're rendering the words spring sale ends today, blah, blah, blah. And then for another user, there might be a totally different variation. But the point is, it causes a layout shift, right? There's no words in the beginning, and then bam, there are words. However, if you're doing it with edge functions, what it basically allows you to do is right away, for example, this is our homepage. We're also doing some A/B testing here. So if you refresh the page, right away, you get served the variation that you need. So, and the reason for that is because we are intercepting the user's request. And then on the server side, on the edge, we are determining which variation that the user falls into, and we return the response right away. And what I mean by edge is basically, instead of having to go back all the way to the origin of the data source. So for example, if the server is at US East in Virginia or something like that, instead of going all the way back there, you can, the request only has to be processed in a local region. So in the case of Sri Lanka, where you guys are at, maybe it's Singapore. So that's the closest edge node to you guys. And that's why the response time is so fast. Whereas if you're doing it on client side, it's way slower and it causes a bad user experience, which is not ideal for SEO as well. So going back to my slides, this is just a very quick example. I'm going to show you, this is another example. Actually, I'm just going to go directly here. So here's an example that I actually helped build. So what it does is when you click run, it basically returns a request in less than 100 milliseconds. And it can basically tell you what the geographic location the user is at. So currently I'm at San Francisco, and it also tells you what the user agent is, what browser you're using, etc. And the user's IP address. So this is a really cool example of how edge functions can be very powerful in a real world context. We have a few examples here that you can feel free to go check it out. But basically, you can do A/B testing. You can do bot protection, like DDoS. If your site is getting DDoSed, you can do a protection on the edge to make sure that the site doesn't go down. You can do host name rewrites, geolocation, internalization. I can never pronounce that word, but it's internationalization, which means it's like if you want to go to a site and then it redirects you to slash, I don't know, EN, which is for English, slash CN for Chinese, whatever, and a lot of other applications. So the reason I brought up all these different technologies, all these different functions, is because it all leads up to the final finale that we're going to be talking about, which is the Platform Starter Kit. So the Platform Starter Kit is actually a project that I helped build at Vercel, and it gives you the ability to build multi-tenant applications. And what that means is there are applications where users have their own subdomains. I think I explained a little bit here. So they all have their own subdomains, and then they can also choose to use their custom domain to map to that particular subdomain. So in the case of this page itself, this is actually a multi-tenant application. So demo.vercel.pub is one page. There's also steven.vercel.pub, that's me. And for demo.vercel.pub, actually there's also Lee, I think. yeah, Lee. This is my manager. He's the head of DevRel at Vercel. So you can basically sign up. You can actually play with this right now if you want to. You can go to app.vercel.pub. Let me actually, how do I log out? Okay, let me log out. And you can just click here, log in, and create a new account. You can start creating new sites. So in this case, I'm gonna just create a site called IEEE, which is just really simple example test. And then once you create the site is already live. So you can actually go back here and you can click on IEE, and it's already live. It's all created on using edge functions on demand. And you can go ahead to add your, if you want to add a custom domain. In this case that I have here, the custom domain is platformize.co. And this custom domain is basically mapped to demo.vercel.pub. In the case of Steven.vercel.pub, I also have a custom domain. It's actually a custom subdomain called blog.steventay.com that is mapped to the same exact site. So the way all this is done, I'm going to dive a little bit into the code. So feel free, Mithushan, feel free to stop me if I'm talking too much about the code. But basically, I'm just going to give a quick overview on how that works and how it leverages edge functions to make this happen seamlessly. So here, this is the repo. It's public. You can check it out. It's github.com/vercel/platforms. Within the pages folder, we have a underscore middleware file. And within that file, we have this line right here. It basically gets the host name that is being requested. So in the case of demo.vercel.pub, the host name is demo.vercel.pub. Or if it's platformize.co, the host name is platformize.co. And then it basically takes that host name value, it rewrites it to a dynamic route under the sites folder. So let me go to the sites folder. Within here, as you can see, there's a dynamic route. And then in the index file of that dynamic route, we use GetStaticProps to basically fetch what the host name is. And then in this case, we're running a few JavaScript logic to determine if it's a subdomain or if it's a custom domain. And then we will just fetch the appropriate data from the server side, from the database, and then we generate the page. And that's pretty much it. It's very, very simple, straightforward. Vercel handles all the domain SSL certificate generation for you. And all you need to do if you want to add a new domain, we actually have an example for that. All you want to do to add a new domain is you can just go in here, you do IE.test-site.com. You just add that, and it's directly added. The user just needs to configure these CNAME records, and the site will be attached to your project automatically. So yeah, that's pretty much it. So it uses GetStaticProps, as I mentioned earlier, and it's actually an ISR. It's not just static site generation, it's ISR, because here you can see there's a revalidate time frame. And it's also on demand because we have a revalidate function. Let me just go to, I think it's API. We have a revalidate function right here that you can call to revalidate a certain path, and that happens within the post endpoint. So here within post, we have, for example, update post, right? So inside update post, we call the revalidate function to trigger the revalidation of a certain page when the post data is being updated by the user. So yeah, it all comes full circle. This uses edge functions. It uses OnDemand ISR to make sure that you are able to create the best possible user experience, where the user can go into their app, they can easily update any of their sites, any of their posts. Again, for example, here I can just quickly create a new post, blah, 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 and if you hit publish, it'll automatically be published right away. And if I go to the main page, it's already updated in real time. So yeah, that's pretty much the end of my talk. I hope I wasn't rambling on too much and I didn't dive in too much into the technicals, but let me know if you guys have any questions. I'm more than happy to answer them. You can put them in the chat or you can raise your hand. But yeah, thank you so much for listening. Stop sharing my screen.
Thanks, Steven. Let's actually, since there are some people who are like fairly new to Next.js as well, could we like talk about the folder structures of what you showed, and also probably like set up like a demo project on Next.js and just run them through that as well?
Sure. So a demo project. Okay, yeah, I can do that real quick. Let me just share my screen again. I'm gonna go right here. So the cool thing about Resell is it basically lets you create new sites very, very easily. So you can just go to resell.com/new, or you can even do, I think it's deploy.new, which is a funny little URL. So it basically brings you to this page. Now within here, you just create a new, just say if you want to create a new Next.js repo, and it will ask you to create a Git repository. I'm going to do Nextjs EE. And then I'm going to hit create. And what that does is it basically clones this demo repo that we have right here. And it creates a GitHub repo for you, and it deploys it directly to Vercel. And right now, once it deploys, it'll take like 20 seconds. I'm going to go into the code and show you a little bit how each of the folder structures work. So let's see. Okay, create an optimized production build. I'm gonna go into my GitHub actually. So Stephen Tay. Okay, it's already done. So I'm gonna go here and click on main. So here you go. It already created a folder for you. Sorry, a GitHub repo for you. And within the repo, here's how a typical, Next.js application is set up. So there's a pages folder, which is where all the routes are. And there's also an API folder. And this is basically where you can set up all your API endpoints. So if you're setting up, like, for example, what I mentioned earlier, the revalidate endpoint, it will live within the API folder within the pages folder. And index is basically / when you go to your root page, demo the Vercel pub. So this is the index route. And then there's also, okay, so in this case, the index route would be here. So this is the index route. So if you want to create a new route, you can easily do so and just do like, I'm just going to copy this file. I'm doing it inside GitHub, so please don't judge me. You can do it inside VS Code or whatever IDE you want. I'm going to create a new file. I'm going to call it about. And I'm going to paste the exact same thing. I'm just going to change this to about. And then I'm just going to new file. And what the cool thing about Resell again is it automatically detects like changes you make to the GitHub repo, and it starts deploying the changes right away to your application. So yeah, about will be another route that lives under /about. So once this deploys, I should be able to access it, but just give it a few more seconds. So there's the API folder, about page, index page. Okay, I think this should be deployed. So when I click this, it is live. So this is the about page. It's the same exact thing because I copied and pasted. But yeah, that's how routing works. There's also a lot of other methods that you can do routing in Next.js. We have a really good sort of documentation. So all you need to do is just Google it within routing. As you can see here, there's routing. There's also nested routes. And then there's dynamic routes. So dynamic routes is really powerful because it allows you to build something like, okay, I'm just going to give you an example of my side project. So there's a little side project I'm building. It's called DAO Central. It's basically a Glassdoor for DAOs, allow you to understand what are the DAOs that are out there. So dynamic routes allow you to create pages that live with the same folder structure. So in this case, this is a dynamic variable. If I change that, it's the same route. So it's /DAO/DAO slug or DAO ID, whatever. So yeah, that's how dynamic DAOs work. dynamic routes. That's how dynamic routes work. There are also like more complex versions like, catch-all routes and stuff like that. I'm not going to go into it right now. And then there's also what we called next link. It's called the link component. And that basically allows you to do really cool stuff such as, the client-side transitions are pretty much instantaneous because it prefetches the data for that page. And then so when I click, it's already loaded. It doesn't need to reload the page again. So that's done using the link component. So all of these pages are really, really fast, really, really high speed. And another thing I wanted to touch on is, oh God, where's my, too many tabs. Another thing I wanted to touch on is the image component. So the image component, as you can see here, I can show you a real world example. So these images, they are all generated and cached. They are all cached using next image, which means that the images are loaded really, really fast, and they are optimized to whatever size your viewport is. So for example, if I'm a mobile, it renders a completely different image, right? I can see copy image address. I can, okay, let me just open it. So here you can see width 1200 Q75, and here it's width 3840. So what it means is it basically generates different dimensions of that image based on the viewport size, which is really good for performance because you don't want to be loading a humongous image when you're on mobile. And that's going to take up a ton of bandwidth and it's going to be really slow. So that's another component that we have. There's also, what else? Font optimization, which basically allows you to like optimize your fonts. And there's the script tag and a few other things. I'm not going to go into everything, but that's basically the gist of it. If you want to host any static assets, so for example, if you have a favicon, if you have an image that you want to host directly on Vercel, you can use the public folder. But if you're hosting a much larger asset like a video, or you're hosting a ton of images, we recommend you using a separate image hosting service because it gets really expensive if you put everything on Resell. So for example, for my project, I'm using Cloudinary. It's a really cool image hosting service that allows you to do cool stuff like, for example, if you want to add a DAO, if you want to upload an image, they give you this cool little upload widget that you can use. You can drag and drop images into it directly. So for example, I want to drag and drop this one, again, we crop them and stuff like that. So Cloudinary is a great option for you to host images. But if you want to host some simple stuff, the public folder is should suffice. Hope that was helpful. Do you guys have any other questions? I think you're still mute, Mithushan. I can hear you.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you.
Cool.
I'm just
Sorry.
checking out some questions.
Cool. So there are a couple of questions that came on Slido. Let's actually start with the last one. It actually sounds very interesting because there are a couple of frameworks that are there to build web applications. Swell Kit is there. Currently, Remix is causing all the hype as well. I think Remix kind of puts Next.js also on the edge, like for the improvement. So what is the future for Next.js like compared to Remix?
Yeah, that's a great question. The way I view and the way we all view competition here at Vercel is we embrace it because that basically provides a better experience and better outcome for the user at the end of the day. Because we all are pushing each other to be better, to be faster, to be, more, give a better user experience in the framework itself. You can, if you look at something like AWS, they don't really have a competition. They're like kind of like a monopoly in that space, and that's why they move really slow. So in this case, we appreciate that there's other frameworks like Remix, Svelte that are constantly pushing the boundaries for web development. And in the case of Next.js, I might be biased, but I do prefer Next.js simply because it like Remix is really heavy into server-side rendering, which, as I mentioned earlier, it's good when you are like when your server is located really close to your database, and your database responses really quickly. And if the server itself is located close to the user. As I mentioned earlier, there's also situations where that's not the case, and therefore server-side rendering might not be the most ideal way to build applications. But they do have a very strong team, and I'm sure they know what they're doing. I just personally, I'm still biased, and I prefer Next.js in that sense. But I do appreciate that there are frameworks out there that people can choose from. Svelte is actually really interesting. That's something that I highly recommend you guys try building an app with, because it's really, really simple. It's like a very minimalistic version of React, where you don't need to worry about, for example, I haven't built with it a lot, but I've seen some demos where it's really, really simple to like do, you don't need to set state. For example, like if you want to create a counter, you just do let I equals 0, and then you do I plus plus, and that's it. You don't have to like, in React, you have to do const state and then use state equals something else. So yeah, that's a way simpler way of building applications that I highly recommend checking out too. But yeah, that's basically my response. I do see another question here that is interesting. It's somewhat related. So why would you choose Next.js over CRA, which is create React app? Few reasons. So one is it's a way better developer experience with Next.js, simply because we use SWC for compilation. And SWC is a framework that's written in Rust that allows you to compile whatever changes you make to the code really, really fast. So for example, you're building your application in VS Code, and you hit Command S to save your code. Hot reload works in CRA, cool. But within Next.js, it's way faster because it's compiled using Rust with SWC. That's one reason, better developer experience. Second, it's way like it handles server-side rendering and static side generation much better. You don't have to, set up your own server rendering mechanism, which you have to do with CRA. So in this case, if you're building content-heavy sites, like if you're building a blog, I don't know, an e-commerce site, for example, it makes a lot of sense to use Next.js. If you're building like an info product, for example, like the one I showed earlier, DAO Central, it's really convenient because we do all the routing in a file-based system, in a folder-based system, and we handle all the server generation for you right out of the box, so you don't have to worry about that. So yeah, that's why I would choose Next.js over CRA. How does Next.js APIs work? Can you do REST APIs? Yes. So REST APIs work within Next.js API routes. And Next.js, one way to think about Next.js API routes, it's very similar to a Node.js server, for example. So if you're familiar with the Node stack, if you're coming from a MERN stack background, Node, so the Next.js API routes is very similar to Node server routes, but in this case, we support ES modules, we support ES6 imports, which means you can do like import something from something else. You don't have to like do require, which is kind of a weird way of building because it's not very similar to the front end. And it's also, you can easily set cache control headers. So today, what I was doing was I was basically using a Next.js serverless function to cache an image response that I'm getting from an API endpoint. So I don't have to continuously request that endpoint. It'll be cached in the Vercel CDN. So yeah, that's my answer for the Next.js API question.
Just a follow up to that. I remember like Vercel or like Next.js is like because of Prisma supporting all the whole serverless aspect and scale coming into play. What do you see as the future for the whole serverless space? Like Netlify recently released the edge functions as well. Everyone's currently moving to the edge. So how is the whole serverless space going to evolve as of now?
That's a very good question. So with the funny thing about Prisma is they don't really have good edge support. So I was
Mhm.
recently trying to build this application where when you click on a link or you click on a page, it triggers an edge function that does some like server side like edge side logic. And then I wanted to store the click data within into my database using Prisma. But it doesn't work because Prisma is not, they don't have edge support. So I had to call a serverless function within my edge function, which is kind of weird. But the world is definitely moving towards the edge. It's just a matter of when, because right now, a lot of the existing libraries don't have good edge support. They're all like Prisma. They don't really support that very well. So it all comes down to when edge gets more widespread adoption. Because like edge is a really scalable way of building applications because it doesn't require you to, for example, um, okay, let me put it this way. So Edge allows you to build applications that is global first. So if you're building an application like a news site or an info product, you might think, okay, in the beginning, I just want to target the US audience. I just want to target the, India, Sri Lanka audience, whatever. But if you think about it, the world is becoming like globalization is like literally very widespread. Like people consume data and consume information from every parts of the world, regardless of where you are. So it's important that your application is built with that into taken into account. So edge functions like edge gives you that ability right off the bat. So you don't have to worry about, oh, I want to serve this content from a server that's close to the user. Instead, all the like data and information, they are all cached in CDNs that are located globally. And if you're doing any personalization, A/B testing, you can do them on the edge, which means that data doesn't have to go all the way back to your origin server and then go back. And that sort of it's that back and forth really takes a lot of time if you think about it. So that's why the edge is so powerful, because instead of going all the way back, you can just do it in a local edge node. And it gives a way better user experience, and it saves you a ton of bandwidth as well, because you're not, sending large amounts of information back and forth. So yeah, I do think that the edge is the future.
Sounds good. Just a quick question. You actually demoed, so the whole, I also had a similar use case about the whole link tracking stuff. So I think
Uh-huh.
Prisma does have another service called the Prisma Data Proxy, which is still in
Yes.
preview. But I
Yes.
think they're trying to move to the edge using data proxy, where they kind of remove some sort of bindings from the Prisma client itself. But I think PlanetScale kind of does it in a better way, if I'm not mistaken,
Mhm.
as well.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
what?
Go ahead.
Go ahead. No worries.
No, I was just gonna say that's true. They do use data proxy. I was trying to use data proxy too myself, but you're right. Like I was also using PlanetScale, and I the reason I didn't go with the data proxy is because I wanted more. I don't remember why. Because I think I wanted to keep using my PlanetScale connection string instead of using the data proxy. But yeah, the data proxy actually does work. But I do prefer if you can do something like, I think Matthew Mueller, who's like a maintainer for Prisma, he did mention an alternative where it's like you do import Prisma client from Prisma Edge instead of Prisma client, Prisma slash client.
Right.
So that would be a really cool alternative instead of having to like not use your database's connection string. It's just really complicated in that sense. But yeah, I'm interested. I'm very excited to see how Prisma evolves, because right now, as just a pure ORM, their monetization strategy is not very clear. So maybe Prisma Data Proxy is the way to go. So we'll see.
Sure, sure. So also one thing about Next, like I've been using it for the past couple of years. I have a couple of projects on Vercel, I have a couple of projects on Railway, I have a couple of projects on Render. So
Yes.
how does the whole ecosystem of Next kind of like deploy everywhere you want? Like what is the ethos behind that?
Mhm. Um, yeah, I think the cool thing about Railway is it's such a good user experience. Like you can literally go in there, provision a Postgres database, don't even have to make an account, and then you can set it up really quickly. The case for Vercel, or the whole developed provision model, is that it's it's a better user experience for large like teams, larger teams, and also individual developers in such a way that you can have a preview URL whenever you're making changes to your application instead of having to make clone in an EC2 container. And it's like having to set it up all that by yourself is just a very complicated process. So having this convenience of just pushing to a different Git branch and then getting a preview URL, that's a really cool way to be developing software nowadays. And I feel like the world is going more towards a Git-based approach, because PlanetScale is also considering this approach where they already implemented it actually, but they are basically Git. They're doing the whole Git approach with database branches. So I think it's really cool. I think this is the way to be building, and the Git is a really proven approach to software development. So yeah, I think you should still be able to run like, I don't know, cron jobs on the railway or render. But if you're building like a Next.js application that has a front end and has API routes, I think it just makes sense to just do it on Vercel, because it's like really good user experience. But at the same time, I'm biased though. Take it with a grain of salt, obviously.
So just a follow up to what you mentioned, like front end, back end. So Next.js is kind of like a full stack framework. There are libraries such as actually frameworks such as Blitz, and there are libraries like TRCP, and then there's Next Connect. So what is the actual best way to go about approaching Next.js as a full stack framework? So TRCP is uh, kind of really fun. That's currently the stack that I'm like hooked into. I like the whole aspect
Nice.
of you write the code and you get the autocomplete in the front end as well. So
Yes.
there's TRCP, there's GraphQL, there's REST API. So what is your approach? Like what, as of now, what would you adopt?
I love that. I love that question. So you mentioned two things, TRPC and also, what was the first one again?
Next Connect. Next Connect is like an adapter for
Good.
Next.js. They kind of allow you to write a Next.js APIs just like Express routes.
Nice. No, there was another one that you mentioned.
GraphQL,
Another
Blitz.js,
one.
is it?
Yes,
Blitz.js.
exactly. So Blitz is really cool. I think I actually met the creator of Blitz, Brandon, very recently at Miami for React conference, and I think what they're doing is very great for people who just want to go in and build like a full stack application without having to worry about auth and all these different functionalities that Blitz has built in. The reason why Next.js is staying to its core of having good developer experience and edge function support, and not branching out into all these different components that is required to build full stack applications, because we want to keep it composable. So composability is a huge aspect when it comes to selling to enterprise customers. So like folks like DoorDash, folks like, I don't know, Hulu, a lot of large enterprise use cases, enterprise people are actually using Next.js. And the reason they use that is because they have their own auth provider. They are maybe using Okta, whatever. They don't want to adapt to like whatever Blitz is doing, which is why Next.js is so appealing to them, because it gives them a lot of these powerful enterprise level features like A/B testing, but without having them to fit into the paradigm of having a custom Blitz auth system. And that's why we decided to keep it as minimal as possible. Going back to TRPC, I think that's also a really cool framework. It's great. Like I'm all for TypeScript. I actually recently started picking up TypeScript, and I'm starting to fall in love with it. It's a really good way for you to build type safe applications and setups without needing to keep, like, the autocomplete is a great plus point that you mentioned. And I feel like TypeScript and gRPC is a form of documentation tool in a way, because it's like when you write code, it basically does autocomplete suggestions of like what attributes or properties you want to call. And it warns you if you're doing a refactoring for it. For example, if you're changing the property for an object, the whole application becomes red, and you got to go in there and fix everything, which is good, because if you didn't know, you might have missed some of the files. And that's when gRPC and TypeScript is really, really powerful. So I do recommend learning TypeScript. It might be annoying in the beginning, but it's very, very useful.
I kind of actually started like adopting TypeScript a lot these days because of DRCP. Kind of it just put me in, it just actually teaches the best flavors of TypeScript and how you can actually use it as well.
Awesome.
So just a quick question, like Vercel has been like hiring a lot of people on board, Svelte creators, Svelte, which came in now recently. I saw Chakra UAK, I can't actually
Yes.
pronounce his name right. I think it was
Yeah.
Sego. Uh,
Yes. I think, yeah.
So, what's the game plan of Vercel? Is it like they are trying to, are they trying to live in the motto of being the SDK for the web? Like, how does the
Mhm.
whole hiring? Why do Vercel hire everyone that's making names in the web development community?
Yeah, that's a great question. Like the way we usually answer, like pitch Vercel is we are trying to get the okay. So there's this really cool image that I don't have access to right now that Guillermo, our CEO, always uses when he pitches Vercel. There is the, it's a figure of a dragon, and there's the head of the dragon, which is the top 10 websites in the world, and that accounts for 33% of the traffic, so one third. And then there's the body of the dragon, which is the top 10,000 websites of the world. And that accounts for another 33%. And then the long tail of the dragon, that accounts for the top, I don't know, 1 million or 10 million websites of the world. And that's another 33%. Our target is the middle part, the body. So the top 10,000 websites on Alexa are basically target websites and folks that we want to be hosting on Resell. And to do that, we are supporting the open source community. We're hiring a lot of great open source creators, Chakra UI, SWC, folks like Rich, who's building Svelte, Sokra, who created Webpack, all these incredible talents. We're bringing them into Resell because we believe that a strong open source culture is the way to build a sustainable business that can last for the next decades to come. So and yeah, you're right about the web the SDK for the web. That's something that we are constantly pushing out because we want to give folks an opinionated way to build applications that are scalable, that are powerful without having to worry about having too much customized, like being able, like, okay, sorry, rewind that a little bit. Give a good example, which is the iOS SDK. When you build with iOS, you can hardly build a bad application because like the SDK that's provided is so powerful and so opinionated. It gives you a great way to build applications, and that's what we want to do with Next.js. We want to allow users to build applications that are so good without having to worry about all the intrinsic details. So a good example is actually, let me just share my screen real quick. There's this example called Super. They are a platform on Vercel that are using exactly
Oh,
what I
sharing,
mentioned
yeah.
earlier. They're using the platform starter kit, and they are actually outperforming a lot of our top websites when it comes to what we call the Lighthouse scores. I'm sure you've heard of this, WebDev slash measure. And the reason for that is because they're using the next image component, they're using script tags, they're using everything. And when their users build websites, they're already benefiting from the Next.js framework itself. So that's basically what we're going to do. We're going to give the SDK to users, to developers, to build very high quality applications.
Gotcha. So, just a follow up to that, I have two questions. Why the switch? That was actually the question on the, you actually brought up SWC as well. So, that was actually a question. Why did Vercel choose SWC for the latest versions of Next.js?
Mm-hmm. That's a great question. I personally am not super familiar with SWC or Rust, but I think, let me see, Rust is the future of the web. I think my manager Lee, he wrote a really good article on that I'm gonna share with you guys in the chat. Everyone in meeting. So this is a great article that I recommend reading to understand a little bit more on why we chose SWC and Rust. So yeah.
Right, gotcha. So coming back to the whole SDK for the web, right? I recently saw like in one of the Vercel conf talks. I can't quite remember his name, but he was the creator of Moti.
Mm,
So he actually did a integration with Expo and Next.js.
right.
Uh, so how does Expo fit into like Next.js? I'm not sure if it's the right question to ask, but
Yeah.
Expo is kind of like the whole SDK for React Native mobile dev. Like now, currently Next.js is targeting React as well. So
Yeah, I think I know what you're talking about. So he's the his name's Fernando Rojo, I think.
right, yes, yes, it was
Yeah,
him.
yeah, it's really cool. So we recently also met one of the core maintainers, Evan Bacon at Expo. We at Next.js, I brought it up before, like, are we gonna be focusing on mobile apps and stuff like that and React Native? It's not in the roadmap right now, but we do understand that there's a huge, like, thriving React Native community. And people are already building open source solutions that adapts the Next.js routing structure, the Next.js, SSG mechanism into React Native development. So we do have a good relationship with Expo that way. But yeah, I think if you're already familiar with React and you know Next.js and you want to build mobile applications, Expo is a way to go. And yeah, I highly recommend using them.
Right, right. So just a quick question on the whole not focusing on the mobile app. Is it just because you want to stay with the SDK for the web? There are packages like Next PWA. I think that's a community driven package that allows you to make progressive web apps. So how is Vercel's support towards projects like that? Then there's Next SEO that kind of like builds on top of whatever Next.js kind of already has like a lot of improvements for the SEO scores. So Next
Mhm.
SEO is like a plugin that builds on top of it. So
Yeah.
how does Next.js tends or like Vercel tends to like support all of these open source packages and whatnot?
Yeah, yeah. Next SEO is great. Like I've been using it for a lot of my side projects. It's really, really powerful when it comes to like just having all the meta tags set up correctly. The cool thing about the web is I think there's this news article that came out recently where iOS is like there's this new update to iOS and Safari where it basically provides websites a way better integration with the iOS SDK. So like you can, I think, don't quote me on this, but you can start calling some iOS functions like, send notifications to users on iPhone using through a web app, which is insane. And I feel like that makes the case for web applications, and the world is moving towards that direction instead of having native apps that people have to download and set up an account on their phone, because the sort of barrier to entry for mobile apps is way higher than just going to a website, setting up your account, and browsing the content directly. So yeah, I think that's the case for the web, and that's why we're so excited for Next.js, is because it just gives you so much customized, like so much functionalities and the ability to build such high quality applications without needing to know something like Swift, without needing to know something like Toolkit. What's it called? I forgot the name. But yeah, it's
Tool
really
chain, I
just
guess.
a much better, exactly. It's just a much better like developer experience and a lower barrier to entry, and that's what we love about Next.js.
Right, right. I
Cool.
still remember going back. I since I started with Next.js because of Lee. Actually, he's this React
Nice.
to React 2025 course. I think that's where I got my initial crash course
Uh,
on YouTube. Kind of stuck into it, kind of liked it, and I was initially an Angular developer. I still use it, but I kind of started loving Next.js because of the whole SEO aspect and stuff. Building all
mm,
my side projects with Next.js itself.
that's
Um,
awesome. I'm so happy to hear that. Cool.
so So that was actually a question in terms of what are the technologies and web dev concepts you kind of need to get started when using starting with Next.js. To add on to that, could you also like talk about the current technologies that's available, probably Prisma, Plan Scale? What are the different options that you have in terms of backend, front end, libraries and databases and whatnot, hosting and whatnot in your perspective?
Yeah, 100%. I think Next.js, what was the first question again? You were mentioning something about, okay, what to get started. So React is definitely the best framework to get started with when you want to learn Next.js. In fact, it might be a hot take, but I recommend folks who already have a JavaScript fundamental back, like you already know some fundamentals in JavaScript, to start with Next.js instead of React, because it sort of gives a more minimalistic approach to learning React. You don't need to know all the React hooks like use reducer, use memo. All you need is pretty much use state and use effect, and you can already build really cool applications. And that's why Next.js is just a much better way to learn. And I'm gonna plug this site. It's called Next.js. Oh god, I can type /learn. So yeah, this is the URL that I recommend you guys checking out. We have a really good like fundamentals course for you to get started with Next.js. And about the state of like Next.js and React, I think what I'm really excited for right now is like the stack I'm using. Tailwind is definitely the way to do CSS. Like it's literally, there's no better framework for you to do if you want to build something really quick. Tailwind is a really good way, and they have really good just-in-time implementation, which means that you won't be loading unnecessary CSS classes onto your page, which is bad for your performance of your app. So Tailwind is great. So Tailwind, Prisma, PlanetScale for the database. What else? Auth. I generally use Nextauth. It's a native Next.js authentication framework. It's really good. It's open source. But yeah, that's pretty much it. By the way, sorry, I gotta run soon. So
Sure. I think we have already hit the hour mark. So any closing notes? Probably we can wrap things up.
Of course. I'm just gonna quickly plug my Twitter handle, but it's just for you guys to ping me if you have any questions, if there's anything that's not clear in this talk that you want me to elaborate on. If you prefer email, this is my email. It's stey@vercel.com, stey@vercel.com. My Twitter is at Steven Tay. So just let me know if you have any questions. I hope this was helpful. I might have dove too quickly into the code, but I just wanted to make sure that we can cover as much as possible in this 1 hour time frame. But yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much, Steven, for actually coming and doing the talk. I know it's pretty late. It's going to get late in the night for you. Sorry about that, but that's the best time we could fit in given the time differences. So he's like a small digital token of appreciation from the IEEE Community Society to
Oh,
you.
this is awesome.
Uh,
Thank
uh,
you.
for actually coming ahead and doing this talk for us.
This is awesome. I took a screenshot. I love it.
Don't worry, I'll be emailing it to you. So
Thank you so much. Thank you.
thank you, Steven, for
You
actually
guys have
having.
a great rest of your weekend.
You too. Thank you very much. We'll keep in
Thank
touch.
Yes.
If anyone has any questions, Steven just put his Twitter handle and his email. You can just reach out to him at any time, or you can connect with him on LinkedIn as well.
Of course.
Right then.
Everyone,
See you guys. Have a great weekend.
have a great weekend. Bye-bye.